In the climate-controlled silence of the New York Children's Aid Society archives, there sits a specific, standardized scrap of yellowed paper. It is a form of indenture. Look closely at the bottom of the page. You won't find a family seal, a coat of arms, or even a legible signature. You will find a simple, shaky X penned by a stranger in a dusty town halfway across the continent. This document is not a record of a family beginning. It is a bill of sale for a human soul, signed in the flickering light of a kerosene lamp. Between 1854 and 1929, exactly 250,000 children were placed on mercy trains and flushed out of the overcrowded, disease-ridden tenements of New York City. They were shipped into the vast, lawless, and silent expansion of the American West. They were not sons. They were not daughters. They were a surplus biological commodity, a byproduct of an industrializing nation that had no use for the small, the weak, or the hungry. It was not an act of charity. It was not a grand social victory. It was a mechanical distribution of human material, designed to clear the streets of the dangerous classes. You have been told the myth of noble pioneers taking in the lost to build a nation under the sun. That is the sanitized, corporate-approved version of history. For the thousands of children who were too small, too frail, or too sickly to work a plow, the destination was not a loving homestead. It was a dark cellar. And the man waiting on the platform did not want a child to love. He needed a body that the law would never look for, a breathing piece of anatomy that possessed no legal record of existence. Modern history prefers the Little House on the Prairie narrative. It is comfortable. It is safe. It allows us to believe that our institutional foundations were built on the bedrock of compassion. I am not asking you to believe my interpretation of these events. I am not here to tell you a ghost story or a campfire legend designed to thrill. I am here to examine the material evidence of a systematic erasure. I want you to pause this video right now. Perform a forensic audit of the reality you were taught in school. Search the digitized archives for the New York Juvenile Asylum or the 1890 United States Census. Look specifically for the bound-out ledgers. Notice the staggering, unexplained percentage of children who simply vanish from the official record within 6 months of their arrival in the Western Territories. Cross-reference those missing names with the private ledgers and case studies of 19th century frontier physicians. Look for the subjects who are referred to only by their age and their ailment. I will wait. Welcome back to the reality that was surgically removed from your textbooks. If you have the intellectual fortitude for the unvarnished math of the witness erased, then we can proceed into the darkness of the 1880s. The system relies on your silence and your willingness to look away from the numbers. The algorithm of this platform actively suppresses these dossiers. If you are ready to look into the freight car and see what was truly happening on those tracks, unlock your access to the archives by joining us now. You are 7 years old. You are shivering on a rough wooden bench inside a freight car that reeks of coal smoke, unwashed wool, and raw, suffocating terror. You haven't seen your mother's face in 3 long weeks. You still remember the smell of the damp laundry in the tenement, but that memory is being bleached away by the relentless clatter of the tracks. The man at the New York station told you your old name was unproductive. He gave you a number. He told you that your past was a debt you had to pay back to society. The train slows. The rhythmic, hypnotic clank of the wheels turns into a mournful, metallic groan. The doors slide open, and the sunlight of a dusty Midwest town is blinding. They lead you onto a wooden platform, blinking and hollowed out, while the townspeople gather to watch the cargo arrive. You are standing in a line with 40 other re-handled children, all of you labeled as charity cases. This is the selection. The local farmers and merchants approach the platform. It is a levee of flesh and bone. Farmers walk down the line, but they aren't looking at your eyes to see the child within. They are checking your teeth for decay like they would a mule. They are squeezing your forearms and calves to judge the density of your bone and the potential of your muscle. They are looking for work stock. They are looking for someone who can survive 16 hours in the sun without collapsing. One by one, the strong are taken. The healthy girls are claimed as domestic servants, their futures signed away for the price of a train ticket. The line disappears until only the rejections remain. In 1880, if a child was not placed, they were a liability. The railroad didn't want to pay for the return trip. The agencies didn't want the overhead of feeding a useless mouth. Then you see him, standing at the far edge of the platform, away from the dust of the cattle, is a man in a high-starched collar and a black wool suit that has never seen the dirt of a farm. He carries a heavy, black leather case. He doesn't care about the strength of your back or your ability to haul a bucket. He is looking at the nodes in your neck. He is watching the shallow, erratic way your chest moves as you cough against the prairie wind. He doesn't want a laborer. He is a rural surgeon in a territory with no medical board, no oversight, and a desperate need for live clinical experience. He pays $5 for your indenture contract. In that moment, the math of the state is complete. You have been legally transferred to a man who requires a shadow patient. Because you do not exist on paper, any atrocity committed against you in the name of science is no longer a crime. The 19th century American frontier was not just a land of opportunity. It was a laboratory of desperation. In the 1880s, the medical profession was a chaotic frontier of its own. Degrees were frequently forged, bought, or inherited. To become a master of the blade, a surgeon needed repetition. They needed to see the internal mechanics of a living body. But practicing on a tax-paying citizen was a lethal risk. A slip of the hand could lead to a lawsuit, a ruined reputation, or a lynch mob outside the clinic door. But an orphan trained child had no birth certificate. You had no living relatives within 1,000 miles who would ever come looking for you. You were a ghost in a black suit cellar. In the doctor's basement, under the flickering light of a single oil lamp, the training begins. There is no anesthesia. Ether is a luxury reserved for those with a surname and a bank account. The doctor needs to master the ligation, the delicate art of tying off a major artery while the blood is still pumping. He needs to refine the speed of an amputation, timed against a pocket watch, to ensure he can perform it on a real patient in the future. He treats your body as a biological map, a piece of raw material to be explored. He isn't trying to save the child on the table. He is using the material to refine the techniques of bone setting and organ manipulation. He is practicing the removal of tumors that he hasn't even identified yet. He is testing the limits of human endurance to pain, recording your reactions in a private leather journal that will never be seen by a medical board. It was not a hospital. It was not a clinic. It was a butcher shop for the unclaimed. If you died under the rusted bone saw, there was no coroner's report. There was no death certificate filed with the county. There was no funeral, no marker, and no prayer. The mathematics of the erasure ensured that your life ended exactly where the state intended, as a blank space in a ledger. Your blood literally wrote the surgical manuals that the world would later call medical progress. You were the hidden cost of every surgical breakthrough of the Gilded Age. We must look deeper into the specific nature of these adoptions. In the 1870s and 80s, the American West was plagued by frontier diseases that the established medical schools in the East couldn't explain. Doctors in places like Missouri, Kansas, and the Nebraska Territory were obsessed with the idea of acclimation. They believed that the bodies of the poor, especially those from the degenerate city slums, were physically different from those of the pioneer class. This led to a series of experimental trials that were never meant for the public eye. Children from the orphan trains were subjected to thermal testing, being left in the extreme cold or heat to see how long it took for the heart to fail. They were given experimental doses of arsenic and strychnine to observe the cleansing effects on the blood. Because these children were wards of the state, the doctor was their legal guardian. He was the only person who could testify to their well-being. If a child ran away, according to the doctor's report, no sheriff would waste a horse to find them. The doctor's cellar was a black hole in the American justice system. The children who survived these tests were often left with permanent neurological damage, shattered limbs, or internal scarring that would ensure they remained dependent on the doctor for the rest of their short lives. They became permanent clinical subjects, living in the shadows of the surgery, their identities completely consumed by the institution. They were the first generation of Americans to be treated as a purely biological resource, stripped of their humanity to serve the advancement of a pharmaceutical and surgical complex that was still in its infancy. Let us look at the sheer cold scale of the void. 250,000 children. That is the population of a major city, vanished into the landscape over the course of 70 years. Standard history focuses on the success stories, the 2 governors, and the 1 congressman who emerged from the R. Trains to tell their tales of triumph. They are the survivorship bias that the system uses to justify the entire program. They represent less than 0.1% of the total cargo. What happened to the tens of thousands of children who were bound out to rural clinics, unregulated charity asylums, and private experimental labs in the West? Between 1870 and 1910, the disappearance rate for orphan children in rural districts was nearly 30%. They didn't all run away into the sunset to find a better life. They didn't all succumb to the winter or the wolves. They were used as material. The rural medical journals of the era are filled with case studies involving unnamed subjects, indigent youths, and disposable specimens. These journals describe experimental surgeries on the spine to observe nerve response in a living subject. They describe the removal of internal organs to witness living pathology in real time. They detail the testing of new, caustic chemical compounds on open wounds to see if they could cauterize blood without the use of fire. The cures of the Gilded Age were built on the backs and the bones of children who had no names to cry out when the blade touched the marrow. Their suffering was the silent foundation of the multi-billion-dollar medical industry that would emerge in the 20th century. We look at the monuments to the pioneers, the vast rail lines, and the grand expansion of the American spirit, and we see the triumph of civilization. We don't see the cellars. We don't see the unrecorded mounds of dirt behind the country clinics. We don't see the children who were turned into data points before they were even old enough to read their own indenture contracts. Every time you look at a modern surgical textbook, every time you benefit from a refined operative technique or a standardized pharmaceutical compound, you are looking at the legacy of the children who stood on those platforms and were never chosen by the farmers. They were the price of the miracle. They were the raw material of the American dream. The question that remains, echoing through the empty, rotting railway stations of the Midwest, is this: when a society decides that a human being has no official record, what is to stop the predators from turning that person into a product? If it was legal in 1880 under the guise of Christian charity, what is stopping the same logic from being applied today under the guise of institutional security? But the exploitation of the voiceless didn't end with the orphans. While the doctors were practicing in cellars, the government was preparing a much larger erasure one that would involve the entire global population. In 1918, a global shadow fell. A virus didn't just kill millions. It was used to test the absolute power of the state signature. While the world watched the war, the government was burning the death certificates of its own people to protect a lie that was far more lethal than the pathogen itself. The file on the 1918 censored pandemic opens next week. The silence of the death parade is louder than you think. I will see you in the archives.